Welcome to 8 Unedited Minutes. In this episode, I'm discussing how to create a successful sales process regardless of your company's size with my guest, Tom Libby. Tom has 20 plus years experience as a sales and business development executive. During his career, Tom has helped improve companies' management, leadership, and sales skills in diverse industries from startups and small companies up to and including Fortune 500 companies. We cover topics such as why you need a sales process in place before hiring your first salesperson, the problems caused by not having a clear sales process and how to avoid them, why, even as a solopreneur, you should be dissecting your sales process on a regular basis, and more golden nuggets of advice. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to 8 Unedited Minutes, brought to you by Smarketing Connect. I'm here with the founder of Smarketing Connect, Tom Libby. Thank you for making the time to be here. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Love it. Love the idea.
And I'd love to jump right in. We were talking the other day about the importance of having a sales process. There's a lot of answers to that question, but I'd be curious on your take. Why is it important to have a very strategic sales process and not just do it willy-nilly?
Well, the simplest answer is because it's repeatable and trainable, right? And scalable for that matter, I should say. So scalable, repeatable, trainable, meaning you can hire 5 salespeople tomorrow, or you can replace 5 salespeople over the course of a year, and it doesn't change. You shouldn't be worried about it changing the outcome of your revenue goals, because you're going to be able to train people up on your sales process, make sure that it's a very repeatable process, and then even as you add salespeople, whether you add, if your sales team currently is 5 and you want to add 5 more or 10 more, it doesn't really matter, because that process remains the same no matter how many salespeople you have.
Well, let's jump back in the number of salespeople in a minute. I'd really curious, what if it's a solopreneur or maybe two co-founders? Where do they start? How to make it scalable?
So let me just, that's actually a great question. I think there's two separate questions here. Number one is, how do they make it scalable? Sure, we can talk about that in a minute. But more importantly, what if they don't need it to be scalable, right? Like, do they really need a sales process if they're the only two that are ever going to sell for the company? That is a different kind of question. And I would still venture to push them to create a sales process, because what ends up happening with solopreneurs, again, solopreneurs that have no interest in scaling up or hiring a bunch of salespeople, they're just planning on doing this all by themselves. If you have a very clearly defined sales process, it allows you to take people down a particular path that you end up with truly ideal customers that you're doing business with, rather than taking a customer out of turn, or taking a customer that you shouldn't have taken, and then all of a sudden you're trying to figure out a way to disconnect and or quote unquote, you get fired from the gig or whatnot. You could prevent a lot of that stuff by having a really good sales process in place that helps you qualify and disqualify people, and helps you identify what really makes a good customer and what doesn't. Now, to answer that question the other way, which is, if you and I are running a business and we're the two founders of the company and we have ambitions to scale, why do we need a sales process today? Is because, again, as we start hiring these people, it becomes part of the onboarding process. So we're not worried about, and I've actually been there, done that. So here's the bad part of it. When you don't have a clearly defined sales process and it's not part of your onboarding, you hire somebody new and you're constantly trying to figure out what's next. What do I teach them next? How do I get them up to speed on this? How do I get them up to speed on that? Well, if you have a very clearly defined sales process, all that stuff becomes crystal clear, and you already have a pathway in order to bring them on board with you. So it's, if you have ambitions to scale, you should start thinking about your sales process almost immediately. You should start thinking about what's good and bad for you and your company right out the gate, what kind of customers you're looking for. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's not necessarily, so what I don't want to give the impression of is that, you can just pick a random template for sales process online that says, you should have a qualifying event, you should have a proposal, you should have review, contract review, sign the contract, onboard your client. Because that's a very easy thing to do. It's a very easy thing to find online. And I would imagine there are some companies that fit that pattern very well, but don't fall into the trap of if it's I'm just going to turn on this template and this should be scalable. You and your company should be identifying and dissecting that sales process on a very regular basis to make sure that it's truly impacting your company in a positive manner.
Well, tell me if I'm on point, and I'll use the word easy intentionally or easier. Even as a solopreneur and co-founder, or two co-founders, maybe three, it sounds like if they have a process that's duplicable, even for him or herself or themselves, it makes it that make it easier to onboard clients?
Yes, and also not just that, also much more predictable in your scale in your own growth patterns, right? So if you have a clearly defined sales process with that solopreneur, to your point, onboarding the client becomes much easier, but also predicting your own revenue streams become much easier. Knowing where and how they fall into your pipeline, and as you pull them down your process, you know what the closability factor is on each one of the stages in your pipeline. You'll be able to be much more and adapted to being able to predict your own revenue, your own salary, like your own money, like, and how it's going to be impactful to you. If you lose a client, how quickly it takes to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
If depending on where people are in that pipeline, you could replace them tomorrow. Maybe it's next month. Again, most of these sales processes that I've helped people design also have very clear timelines for each stage of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Just give you a simple example. You're bringing somebody down the pathway. If you're stuck at, let's say, step number 3, I'm not gonna pick a particular wording for it, but let's say you're stuck at number 3, and your timeline for number 3 says if they're stuck at number 3 for 30 days or more, you got to push them back to the top. Like, just get them out of there, because you can't then have it predictable. You lose the predictability factor if you get somebody stuck at a certain stage longer than you're supposed to have them be there. So you can move people up and down your sales pipeline or in sales process depending on also timelines. It's not just check boxes on what do I check in the box to make sure that I go from step 1 to step 2. Again, from qualifying, disqualifying. Okay, I got all these check boxes. I have qualified them now. Now that I'm going to bring them to step 2. And step 2 is whatever, like some sort of proposal or whatever, right? But you give them the proposal, but they never get to the contract review. Well, guess what? You're probably going to bring them all the way back to qualifying, because maybe you missed something. Either you asked a question the wrong way, or you didn't ask them, or that you missed a comment they made, or there's something that it was in that qualifying event that you probably missed as to why they don't want to do the contract review. So again, I'm talking about, I know I'm a little scattered here, but hopefully I'm making sense to people, and especially to you, Mark. Hopefully I'm making sense. But as you're creating this sales process and you're defining what it looks like, some of them are simple check boxes. I'm just, every time I check the box, it moves to another stage. Check these boxes, move to another stage. Sometimes you put timelines on it, because if it doesn't go to the next stage within a certain timeline, you push it back. Usually that's where you have sales and marketing departments, because if it doesn't get to a certain page, you could push it back all the way back to like a prospecting, label it as a prospect and not put it in the sales process. And just to give you an idea what I mean by that, because in my philosophy here, there are 3 processes that run revenue generation from a business standpoint, outside of retention. So think of like customer retention as its own revenue stream. But for sales and marketing, you basically have 3 processes that feed into each other. You have the lead generation process that feeds into a prospecting process, and the prospecting process feeds into the sales process. Well, and each one of these processes have very clearly defined stages and check boxes that you're using to push them from one to the other. And usually you have these 3 scenarios when you have a good sales and marketing team. So you have 2 different teams that are running some of this stuff for you. It's not usually, you're not doing that in a well, I shouldn't say that, because even solopreneurs should probably be thinking of it that way, but you are yourself still functioning all of the processes. So sometimes you get a little confused as to which one's which, but it's
with everything we mentioned in a short period of time, what would you say to close out the most compelling reason to have a sales process? What would you sum it up to be?
I would go back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this, which would be trainability, predictability, and scalability. Those 3 things all come those 3 things come almost naturally with a really good sales process.
And if people want to find you online, where's the best place to go?
So, I mean, obviously smarketingconnect.com is our website. You can always find me there. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a tremendous network on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think that's it. At least I think.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate you making the time.
Always, anytime I can help.